the OldPreMeds podcast, session number 152. You're a non-traditional student entering the medical field on your terms. You may have had some hiccups along the way, but now you're ready to change course and go back and serve others as a physician. This podcast is here to help answer your questions and help educate you on your non-traditional journey to becoming a physician. Welcome to the OldPreMeds podcast. My name is Dr. Ryan Gray, your host here every week, where I take questions directly from the non-traditional or OldPreMeds forums over at medicalschoolhq.net/forums. Before we continue on with today's episode, I want to remind you about our newest podcast, the MCAT Cars podcast with Jack Weston. If you haven't checked out that podcast yet, I highly recommend you do, especially if you haven't taken the MCAT yet. One of the biggest components to the MCAT is understanding what you are reading, knowing what you are doing, and really thinking critically through it. And that's what we do on the MCAT Cars podcast. So check it out at mcatcarspodcast.com. Listen today on your favorite podcast app, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, wherever you listen to podcasts, wherever you're listening to this right now. Today we have a great question from a student who is thinking about reapplying, getting in that mindset of reapplying, and wondering what she'll have to do. She says, I recently listened to an episode of the Q&A where Dr. Gray talked about needing to rewrite your personal statement when you reapply. I understand the logic behind it, but it felt more applicable to the younger traditional student. The driving point made was the student is expected to, quote, grow between the cycles. As far as my application is concerned, my stats are low, and I see that as the primary hurdle to even being looked at. I'm working on a do-it-yourself post-bacc and will retake the MCAT if needed. But otherwise, I'm having trouble seeing how to improve my application. I feel my personal statement is pretty good and very honest. Beyond numbers, I can't see how to improve my chances for next year. I have one interview invite for this cycle. If I don't get in this year, what should I do? I find hoop jumping to be disingenuous and have done my best to approach this entire process with open eyes and honest effort. Not just tick box to make you like me. Thanks for your help. All right, so here's the question, right? You applied to medical school. You've laid your heart out in your personal statement, in your extracurriculars, in everything that you've done to this point. How does that change from year to year if you need to reapply? Now, here's some of the key phrases that I want to pull out of what this student said. And she says, as far as my application is concerned, my stats are low, and I see that as the primary hurdle to even being looked at. Okay, great. But how do you know? You're not the admissions committee reviewing the application. They may look at your stats and go, they're a little low, but let's look at the rest of it. Oh, this personal statement, maybe not. But the student says, I feel my personal statement is pretty good. Again, how do you know? It's hard to know what it is in your application that is causing the schools to be turned off. Is it as easy as my stats are low? Could be. A lot of times it is, but you don't know. And maybe they've read your personal statement and your stats are low, and your personal statement wasn't good enough to overcome and make them go, I see that the stats are a little low, but man, this personal statement, I really want to talk to this student. Now, it obviously worked for one school. The student has one interview invite for school for this year. So that's awesome. But what was it about the application that made one school decide to interview her versus other schools? We don't know. And that's the biggest problem when you need to reapply, which is why the advice is change as much as you can. And it's hard with a personal statement because the personal statement has one goal in mind: to show the admissions committee why you want to be a physician. I was a little confused by the statement here. I feel that my personal statement is pretty good and very honest. And very honest? Like, would you lie in your personal statement? What are you being honest about in your personal statement? Now, a lot of students will quote unquote be honest about the struggles they've had and the hurdles they've overcome and the failures they've had. And if I'm supposed to read into the personal statement in that way, then I might say, well, maybe your personal statement went in the wrong direction. Because the personal statement is supposed to talk about why you want to be a physician, not tell me about all of the hurdles you've overcome along the way. So that's the issue with the application process and needing to reapply. There are so many variables in an application that you just don't know what it is that caused the issue for not getting an interview invite. And so as you're going through this process, hopefully you're still getting clinical experience. Hopefully you're still shadowing. Hopefully you're still out there doing things, gaining more experience. And so when it comes to rewriting your personal statement, when it comes to rewriting your extracurriculars, you have new stories to lean on to show the interviewer the interactions that you've had with patients, with physicians, to highlight why you want to be a physician. Now, your beginning story, what I call the seed, as to what made you want to look into medicine to begin with, that's not going to change, right? Your seed is your seed. You can't change your seed, but you can change a watering story. What watered that seed that led you to being even more convinced that being a physician is right for you? Now, as you're going through the application process, preparing to reapply, you're still getting volunteer experiences, you're still getting shadowing experiences, hopefully clinical experiences, and you're journaling after each of these activities so that when it comes to rewriting your essays, your extracurriculars, you have different stories to lean on. Okay? So it's hard to look at an application and going, well, I think it's just my stats. Everything else is good. You can't tell yourself that, because it's a lie, because you don't know. You don't know what the admissions committees are looking at. You don't know how they're reviewing and judging and critiquing your essays. You don't know. So don't try to convince yourself that they're good. They may be great, but you don't know. And so the general advice is rework as much as you can with new stories based on new experiences that you're getting through this time. And if you go to the pre-med year, session 171, you'll hear an episode dedicated to reapplicants. And one of the biggest mistakes that students make when they're reapplying is reapplying too soon and not being able to fix their application, fix whatever it was that was wrong with their application to begin with, which caused them to not get an interview or not get an acceptance. What was that number one thing where students didn't get in? Lack of clinical experience. It's huge. It's important. You got to do it. So as you are looking at reapplying, hopefully you don't have to, number one, for this specific student, mother of dragonflies, for this specific student, she has one interview invite. It only takes one. Hopefully that's her one. But if she needs to reapply, you need to reapply. Look at tweaking your essays, tweaking your extracurriculars, and really presenting new stories to highlight your journey to why you're doing this. Hopefully that was helpful for you. If you want to have your questions answered here on the podcast, go to medicalschoolhq.net/forms, sign up for an account if you don't already have one, and then go to the non-traditional or old pre-med form and ask your questions and look through the other questions that are there and answer and get into a conversation with other students. It's a great community. Again, medicalschoolhq.net/forms. If this was a great podcast for you, I would highly, highly recommend you share it with a friend. I would love for you to do that. I would greatly appreciate it. Hope you have a great day. We'll see you next time here on the Old Pre-Meds Podcast.